Good evening, everyone. This is Ron. It's Monday evening, a little after 6 p.m. So we will go ahead and get started with our session. Uh, and we'll start off with questions. If you have any questions or comments about anything, anybody?
I have a
Okay.
question. I have a
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Not about because I wasn't on Saturday and Sunday. About the collar, that Reverend Richardson maybe answer this one. What is the purpose and the meaning of the collar?
What are you talking about? What, you talking about the preacher collar?
Yeah, the little white collar they put on.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. There's no real purpose for other than following the tradition that came out of Catholicism, and it's followed with the Methodists, the Episcopalians, and some of the other Christian religions. All of it had its origin in the Catholic Church, and it's simply a way of identifying who you are, and simply actually gets you privileges that you would normally get if you were just an ordinary person. No different than the robes that were worn by the priests with the bells on the bottoms of them, so they would be noticed when they went to the marketplaces. Same thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hey, Ron, I got a question.
Yes,
That
sir. How you doing,
scripture,
sir?
I'm doing great, man. How's everybody doing? The
Right.
scripture I want to understand, it might have been told so many times. Um, if my people was called by my name, would pray, humble themselves and pray, I will heal the land.
Seek my faith, and I
Will
will.
seek my faith and heal, I will heal the land. But anyway, I want more clarity on that because I'm unsettled with that scripture, or what it's really saying and what is God is telling his people. Not just what the word is being said through the book. I want to know what God is telling his people so they can understand.
Just for because I don't remember it right off. Where is that? What scripture is that?
I can't pull it up right now because I've been just wrestling with that in my mind.
It's in Chronicles.
Okay.
I do know it's in Chronicles.
Chronicles something. I think they talk on that. So got close to it anyway.
I didn't get my phone to work.
Second Chronicles 7:14.
Thank you.
I'm going to read it a whole lot better. It said, and my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sins, and will heal their land. I want to understand, what is God trying to tell his people? I mean, a lot of people don't say this scripture. A lot of people don't say, yeah, that's what God is saying, but I don't think they really know.
Okay.
First of all, that scripture, it says, if people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, and hear from heaven, and I will forgive their land. I will forgive their sin. It doesn't say then I will hear. It says and hear from heaven. So it's talking about if those who are called by my character or recognized to have my character will humble themselves, will be humble and meditate and seek my countenance and turn from their wicked ways and hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. That's what it's saying.
Charles, did you
Okay.
have a
That
specific
land
question?
board. Go ahead.
No, I was just asking, what did you have a specific question or just want an understanding of the whole thing? The pastor answered for you?
I just want a deeper understanding of this. I mean, I know it's more than what it's saying, and it's more than what most people understand. Unless you can't understand what I'm saying. Because I'm grasping what Rev had said. But I'm thinking it's something dealing more in here than when they're talking about healing the land, and I know the land is consciousness.
Okay, this is the best
Go ahead.
if the all he's saying is if the people who claim to live according to my reputation or my character, if they will humble themselves and meditate, and if they would seek my countenance, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, which means turning from those ways that are contrary to the ways of the Creator, then they hear from heaven. If they will hear from heaven, meaning if they will listen to the enlightenment that's available to them, then I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. I will free them from their entanglements and I will bring healing to their consciousness.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Pastor, because I was all twisted up when I read that. And I was trying to, but I mean, that's what we, is trying to learn and trying to do now so the land can stop to be healed, right?
Yeah, I think, you're right, because that applies today, Charles, as much as it did the day it was written. If you look at where we are and what's going on in the earth, what's going on in this country, what's going on in this state.
So that's why my heart was tugged to try to understand this, because I don't like to say our people, every people on the planet is not listening to this, or they're not putting it into use, or we're not putting it into use, brother.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Charles.
Faith can also mean presence.
Say that again, Reb.
Faith can also seek my face, seek my presence. Become aware of my presence with them.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
I have a
That helped.
question.
Go
Hello?
ahead.
Hey, family. I have a question, kind of like what Charles talking about. The earth needs the earth going through what it's going through. So does the earth need does the earth need healing now? And are we the balm of Gilead? We're the ones who healing the consciousness of mankind? That's my question.
The healing of the earth is healing of the consciousness. Because the physical earth itself, there's nothing wrong with it other than man. When the attitude of man receives healing, then the earth itself will be healed. And that is the reason the scripture speaks of the earth moaning and groaning, waiting for man's redemption. Because it's the attitude of man that controls the nature of the earth. And that's based upon the reality that with the creation of man, man was given the mandate to dominate the earth. So however man treats each other, that is going to be reflective in the physicality of the earth itself, which means that the consciousness of man is reflected in what we see in the response of the earth in terms of how it treats man, or how it acts or reacts or responds to the attitudes of man. When men are evil, earth becomes an adverse thing to man. Prior to men thinking that they were to rape the earth rather than dominate it, people lived in conjunction with the earth, and the earth provided everything that men needed to survive. And the destruction that appears now was unknown during that period of time when men lived in conjunction with the earth, as opposed to making every effort to actually destroy the earth for their own greed. Thank you.
So, if you will, and thank you for answering that, can you define the balm of Gilead, please?
A balm in Gilead, a balm simply speaks of something like walking fast, something that you wear on you for healing. And if you are the balm in Gilead, then that means that you are the ointment that brings healing to the earth itself. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's cut and dry. Thank you.
Good stuff. Anyone else? Questions or comments?
I got one more thing for right now. So I can't heal the world if I don't have myself in line with the Creator, right? I mean, you have to get yourself right before you can help someone else. Am I not correct?
It is my contention that the easiest way to help you to get healed is to bring healing to somebody else. Your desire to be delivered, and if you have a genuine desire to be healed, and I'm not talking about sickness and disease, I'm talking about spiritually healed, okay? If you have a desire for that, then what happens is other people who are in need of it cross your pathway. And when you reach out to them and help them get through the dilemmas or the circumstances that they face, when you look back at yourself, you will see that you have been delivered from, or you have been able to overcome those things that you were faced with during the period that you helped them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think all part of what your question, or Evelyn, is part of what confuses us, and it's something we got from the church. You know, getting right myself before I can do anything. I've even heard people say, I got to get right before I can go to church. It goes back to, I guess, something we talked about last week. We've been taught to feel guilty about and not understanding what the scripture talks about when Jesus said, "Be ye perfect." So, you know, it's really no such thing as I got to get right. What we're doing is trying to seek truth, and we see that those parts of us that, you know, need ripening, right, the unripened, the right part of us, and we grow from that. But no one misses an opportunity to help their child because they're not right, or something's, you know, not perfect. So I think that's part of the confusion that has been put in us that we still kind of wrestle with.
I think you're
Well,
right, Ron.
You know what, too? I'm sorry. I
Go
yield.
No,
Well,
I
I was
was
going to
just,
say, I yield.
I was just agreeing with Ron because the scripture specifically tells us to come as you are. So yeah, we've gotten all this stuff in our heads about what the church has taught about what we need to do and all this before we could even set foot in there. But that is not true.
You're right.
Go ahead, Evelyn.
Okay, thanks, Odd. But I have to remind myself, my desires and thoughts should not be just for me. Hold on a minute. Yeah, I have to remember anything that I desire or work toward is not just for me. It's about mankind in general. And sometimes I forget about that because I get selfish and I'm saying, oh, me, what about me? But thank you for that, because that thought just came back to me. I can't be selfish on my desires. I have to think about mankind in general. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? I was talking with Pastor, and he went into part of it on yesterday. Pastor went out of town over the weekend and went on a tour, and he toured a church that I think is some stuff that he saw and learned there was pretty fascinating. And I was going to ask him to share that with us this evening, because I think it's a good opportunity to learn more about African history. And well, I'll just let him explain it in his way. Pastor, do you mind sharing that with us?
Well, it's too late now if I did, right? No, I don't mind. Yesterday, well, Saturday actually, Steve and I had the opportunity to tour the first African Baptist church in Savannah, Georgia. And I made mention of it, I think, yesterday. And during the tour, I was very, very not impressed, but I was very grateful for being led to that particular church, because I learned a lot. One of the main things I learned is that it is impossible, not improbable, but impossible to separate the spirituality of the African from the history of the African. it is also impossible to separate the history of the African from religion itself. And the only reason we have been taught to separate history from the scriptures is because we have been taught that we don't have a history. And if we look at the scriptures and history, or if we look at the scriptures the way they are written, and we look at the characters in the scripture, it is impossible to understand the scriptures without understanding the history of the African. It is inseparable. And I say all of that because there are so many who go to church on Sundays, and there are so many who sometimes are on this line who get, quote-unquote, tired of us talking about African history in relationship to spirituality. And if that is the case, then I want you to get some rest, because it's not going to change because of the impossibility of doing one without the other. Now, 1777, this particular church was organized in Savannah, Georgia. During the period of his organization, within the confines of that congregation, there were people who spoke different languages. They spoke Portuguese, they spoke English, they spoke French, and they spoke various other African languages. So they had very little in common when it came to language. Yet they were able to come together in that particular congregation. One of the most fascinating things that I learned about that church, and it has a history of starting in 1777, building being restructured in the 1800s. So you can look up the history of it yourself and get the details. And I won't go into the minute details that we were shown Saturday. I'm just going to give you an overview. When that structure was built, the current structure, because there was one prior to it, and they tore it down to build the current structure. When this current structure was built, they decided that they were going to build it with bricks instead of wood. The pastor during that period of time was 99 years old, and when the white masters, slave owners, found out that what they were doing, building it with brick, the 99-year-old pastor was taken across the street, which is now a park, and beaten almost to death because he used the master's material in building, because enslaved people could only use wood to build. This white deacon from First Baptist Church, from whom they had purchased the property, came to his defense, and they were allowed to continue to build the structure with bricks. Now, keep in mind that they were enslaved people, and they were not allowed to do the building during the day. So what they did, they would build during the night. They worked in the fields all day, and at night they would lay the bricks, make the bricks, and lay the bricks. Well, that was a dilemma they ran into, because African men, were not allowed to move around at night. So the African men were down at the river, which was a quarter of a mile away from the structure, making the brick, and the African women were able to move around at night. So they had to put the brick in croaker sacks, tie them around their necks, and bring them a quarter of a mile uphill to the structure, and the men were there waiting to lay the bricks. And the edifice that they built seat well over 1,000 people. And to this day, it has an international architectural rating of A+. So it is structurally sound, just as sound now as it was when they constructed it. The pastors in that particular congregation are, there are 6 who on the stained glass windows who laid the foundation for that church and brought it to where it is now. But one in particular, other than the 99-year-old pastor, is the one I wanted to talk about is because he was preaching about Jesus being resurrected and delivering people from their sin. He preached about Jesus breaking the bonds of slavery, etc., and freeing people. And there was a white slave master in the congregation when he preached that. And they told him, since you want to do this, we're going to let you feel like what Jesus felt. So they tied him to a cross, and they beat him so unmercifully until people around began to beg them to leave, to stop beating him. And they did, but they really, really marred his face and really pretty much destroyed his health, because 2 years later he was dead. In this church, there were places in the floor that they had left hollow, and the floor could be easily removed. And under the floor, there were people who were hidden who were going to escape from slavery. Within this congregation, there was a ship pilot, and this ship pilot carried enslaved people and carried materials up and down the coast of Georgia. And what they would do is hide people who were going to escape under the floorboards. And at night, they would sneak into the church, get them out, take them to his ship, the ship that he was the pilot of, and he would take them to Fort in Georgia. Not Fort. Anyway, it'll come to me. And that was a fort that was occupied by the Union Army, and they would be moved from that Fort Pulaski, I think it is, and they would be moved from that fort up north. But one of the things that caught my attention the most is that not only was it prevalent in that particular congregation, but it was prevalent throughout the slave communities. And that thing is, that was a quilt that was made to show the symbols that the enslaved people used in order to escape slavery. And the reason they made the quilt is to enlarge what was considered a map of escape. And that map of escape included the story of the Underground Railroad. And it had different symbols on it, and each one of those symbols told a story. The first symbol on it looked like it was like patches sewn into this cloth, and it was actually depicting the railroad, but it looks like Jacob's ladder. Every rung goes higher and higher. It was like get to the Underground Railroad. And the next one was another symbol, but it talked about monkey wrench, but it didn't look nothing like a monkey wrench. And the monkey wrench turns the wheel. So it meant that they were going to go to a place where there was a wagon to carry them. And it went on and on, telling the whole story of where they were supposed to meet. The wagon carries them to the riverside or to the crossroads. And make sure you have your basket filled with whatever you need, all the stuff you need in your basket. Well, each person who was going to escape were given a piece of cloth about the size of a handkerchief, and all of these symbols were embroidered on that cloth. And if you were to look at it, it looked like it was simply a miniature quilt that was sewn from different pieces of cloth and different patterns, but had no meaning whatsoever. It was fascinating to see, but on the back of it, it was translated as to what all of it meant. And while we were there, being shown that, we were also shown something else that fascinated me as well. And by the way, please don't let me forget to mention Hebrew letters and hooping. They showed us. We went to the before I get to the basement, the structure was built with a basement, and the pillars that held the balcony was in a horseshoe shape, and the pillars that held it were built from the ground up. In other words, when they added the balcony, they cut holes in the floor of the church and in the floor of the basement, and they dug all the way down to the foundation, and they structured those pillars from the foundation all the way up through the first floor to hold those balconies. And those balconies are so structurally strong now until a hurricane can't move them. Then in the basement there were holes in the floor, and they were diamond shaped. They were bored holes in the floor in a diamond shape, and they told the slave owners that they were for ventilation. Well, they were for ventilation, but the shape of them was not for ventilation. The reason they needed the ventilation is because it was only 11 feet above sea level, and they needed the ventilation so that the moisture would not create mold beneath the building. So what those diamonds represented was a place of meditation and a place of contact with the ancestors. So what they would do is stand in the midst of those in diamond shape, and what they would do, they would meditate, they would pray, and get directions from the ancestors, and that's how they stayed in contact with the ones who were left in Africa, as well as those who had died during the period of slavery. Even though all of this sounds as though it is extremely fascinating, I know I'm missing a lot, but the thing that got me also, well, first let me tell you about the hoop. We as a people put so much emphasis on hooping for the purpose of entertainment, and we don't really understand what it really meant and where it came from. I do believe that if we were to really understand the power in the hoop, we would not play with it the way we do. The reason that the preachers would hoop is because they were telling a story about escape, or they were telling a story about what others had heard the masters say about selling other slaves to other plantations, or the movements that were going to take place in regards to slaves. And it will go something like, as they illustrated, if someone was about to escape, the hoop would be about Peter rowing the boat on the water, or it would be about Jesus coming to the disciples on the waters, or it would be about something about going down to the waters to be baptized and wading in the water, the rivers of the reeds, which means that you are going. There are those who are going to the water to escape, and they need to carry with them the reeds. And the reason they carry reeds with them is because when the dogs came looking for them, they would go under the water and breathe through the reeds, which means that we introduced snorkeling to this world too. But and that was the purpose of the hoop. It had entertaining anyone. It was for the express purpose of telling the story about the plight of the people, an escape that was already in the making. Are there any questions so far before I go forward?
Yes, Reb. When you were talking about they were telling a story, and they was telling the stories through the hoop, because that way it's all like a sign. The only one can understand it was the culture of us, but the master couldn't understand it.
But the reason they developed it is because the master or one of the slave patrols would be in the congregation. And that's why they developed the hoop, in order to tell the story. They couldn't do it by drums. They couldn't do it by meetings. They couldn't do it openly, so that's how they did it. Now, any other questions about that or comments? Okay. Now this.
I'm just going to say that's just ingenious to me that all the using their imagination to do all the things they did, communicating and you're talking about part of it was nobody thought they were intelligent enough to do any of these things, and all of it was being done right there in the open. It's just fascinating to me.
Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to contact Janice, and I'm going to send her a picture of this quilt that I'm talking about, and I'm going to ask her to use it for the background at Foundation, so that you will be able to go on Zoom, and when we're teaching, you will be able to see that quilt. Does that make sense?
Excellent idea. Yeah,
I'll make it happen.
Great idea.
Okay. So I'm going to send it. Jenny, you on now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to send it to you as we're talking. Okay.
All right, I'll be looking for it.
Okay, and the other thing that fascinated me about it is that the pulpit, when the pulpit was structured, in that pulpit, on each side of the podium, rather, there were markings, and those markings on each side of that podium looked like someone had taken a nail and just scratched out marks on it. It looked like some child had taken a sharp object on each side of it and marked it. And the same thing appeared on the east side of the pipe organ. Now, the pipe organ in that church was put in there, I believe, in the early 1800s. So it was one of the oldest pipe organs in the world. And what happened is the assistant pastor, the one who was guiding the tour, gave us an opportunity. Called people to come from Harvard, people he knew at Harvard who studied ancient Hebrew and Arabic. He brought them down to Georgia to look at those etchings, and what they concluded was the one who is an expert in Arabic. What he concluded was that it was nowhere near in anything that was written in Arabic. However, the one with the guy who studied ancient Hebrew, it took him a while. However, in the midst of his research of ancient Hebrew, he found that these were Hebrew letters. And the enslaved people, all of them knew what those letters meant. The one thing that they had in common was that those Hebrew letters, they understood what they meant. And ironically enough, the story that the Hebrew letters told was the story of Philip speaking to the Ethiopian eunuch, and asking the Ethiopian eunuch, do you understand what you read? Ethiopian eunuch says, and you know the story, how can I understand unless I have someone to teach me? And that's where the story ended. And the reason it ended there is because the podium was the place where all teaching was to emanate. Everything that came across that podium was supposed to teach something, not just teach what the scriptures were saying, not just teach what they were told to teach, but to teach everything, including how to escape, including every remembrance that they had of where we came from. So this was a teaching effort for a teaching mechanism, rather, for all of the Africans who attended that congregation. and I have also a picture I took of those etchings, and they simply look like scratch marks. Now, that spoke volumes to me, because immediately what came to me was my understanding of how the Cushites were driven out of northeastern Africa, out of Egypt, out of the Cushite territories, out of the Cushite kingdom by the Europeans and by the Arabics. And what happened is the Cushites were pushed from the kingdom into Central Africa towards West Africa. And to this day, if you go to Nigeria, you will find in the bush country that you will find the worship is no different than what it was tens of thousands of years ago. And the worship of which I speak is what we call Judaism. The type of worship that is now called Judaism, but it is different than that in that it is a pure, unadulterated, spiritual experience that was brought with them from that area of the country, and the language of Hebrew was also brought with them. Even though other dialects came into play afterwards, those Hebrew letters and the Hebrew language was still a part of their culture when they were brought to this country, especially to the islands, the Sea Islands, and to the coast of Georgia itself. And I felt I listened at that, and the first thing came to my mind was, when you look at this and these etchings and you understand their origin, there is no way in the world that you can ever believe that an Eastern European is a Jew or that an Eastern European is a Hebrew. You cannot believe, you cannot in any way wrap your mind around how a Hebrew can be a Caucasian. That is impossible. Not only that, but it also spoke something to me. If this language was the one language that they held on to and were able to do these etchings and to tell this story about the teachings, then that tells me something else. A Hebrew is a river crosser. A Hebrew is one who crosses from one life into another. That means that we were indeed a nation born on the ocean, the nation born on the waters, and we were brought across the waters for the express purpose of teaching spirituality in this nation. That's what I drew from all of this. And in my discussion with the guy afterwards and saying these things to him, he readily saw what I was talking about. But more importantly than that, he also made a statement to me that he tells people, do not call yourself black. You're not black, and you're not an African American. You're African. And I kind of smiled, because my words to him were, I feel the same way, because everything else, and he finished my sentence, everything else separates us from each other. So I do believe that my going to that place was not something haphazardly done. I believe that it was for the purpose of bringing to this place of the macro and understanding, but more importantly, bringing to the place of the macro an opportunity for people to see beyond the ignorance that we have been indoctrinated with in regards not only to our people, who we are, but more importantly, the ignorance that we have been indoctrinated with when it comes to the scriptures, and being afraid and ashamed of who we are, and imbibing everything that Caucasians gives us about Christianity without even bothering to look at the origins of it all and understanding that the depth of the manipulation of it, but the power, the strength, the intellect, the spiritual strength that our ancestors held on to in order to bring us to this place and to bring us here, not for us to live a history of slavery, but bringing us here because this is the place where teaching must take place. And the teaching that must take place is a teaching that will bring those who are different than what we were, those who enslaved us, will bring them to a place of understanding that we are the spiritual life of this earth, and is our obligation and desire to share that spiritual life with them so that they can abandon their barbaric history and they can abandon their barbaric attitudes and ways and become who they were created to be, as were we. That's it as far as right now, unless you got a question. And there are some other things that came to my mind in regards to Egypt as a result of this experience also. But right now, are there questions or comments?
Hey, good morning. Good evening, everyone. I hope what I'm about to say, it kind of supports what you have already stated, Reverend Richard, about the symbols and the quilts. When you look at a certain percentage of our designers out here, Agna or Agnia, Gloria Vanderbilt, Fendi, these are all symbols that come out of a Kabbalah and or Africa. And a designer by the name of Dapper Dan, Gucci stripped him of everything by way of copyright infringement. And his kids, Gucci's kids, were so in love with hip hop, they brought Dapper Dan on as a consultant. He's out of Harlem, about 75, maybe 80 years old. And he talks about the psychology of fashion, of how these symbols come out of a Kabbalah and or Africa, or out of Kemet and or Egypt. And he was kind of like saying some of the same thing what you were saying and what he was saying, of how we communicated by way of these symbols of what to do. If it intrigues you, you can always go to YouTube and look it up, but that's all I had to say. Thank you.
In regards to what you were saying about the designer symbols, every single one of the designer symbols, whether it be Gucci, Fendi, or whether it be, what are your famous name purses, all these, especially the products that are aimed at females, all of those symbols came out of Africa, every single one of them. And the psychology of those symbols was used in order to not only to sell to those who had the means, but also to make them a thing of desire for those who had to struggle to buy them. And the psychology of them does not stop at how they look. They also are that they are, because they speak to something deeply into that African. There is something familiar about those symbols, and it draws you to them, and you will spend 10 paychecks on the purse that they took $2 to make, and you will spend $1,000 on it simply because of the symbols, because it makes you look like you're important. And they use those symbols for that express purpose, because they knew beyond the Caucasian, it would definitely draw Africans to those type of products. And I have somewhere in my bookmarks where it explains and shows every one of these symbols and from what part of Africa they originated. So with that, you are dead on, George. Thank you. Anyone else or any questions?
I guess couple things. One, I could just feel the energy when you were explaining that, and you talked about the foundation of the building, and I can just see just picture that, just the energy of that being held together, and the strength of all of that, and those symbols on the podium. If they didn't look like scratches, they probably would have been destroyed or challenged by somebody. So it looked like something that has no value to it, but the strength in it would be unknown to those who don't recognize what they are. So it just the story, just to hear it, just brings about a sense of pride, you know, who we are, where we're from, our ancestors, and even especially the struggle and the pains that people endured for us to have this opportunity today to even talk about this. So I just think it's something special.
I actually see it also run as a hell of a price to pay for us to sit back and do nothing with, meaning that they paid a price for us to be able to do the work that we were brought into the earth to do, to be Elohim in this earth, so that the earth could, so that everyone in the earth rather could benefit from the presence of Elohim in this earth, and rather than do that, we have taken the other road and desired to be like the barbarian who is materialistic, rather than to be who we were created to be, and still bring civility to the barbarian, and put materialism in the place where it should be, as a servant to man, rather than man being a servant to it.
Yeah. Have you given any thought why Savannah? Why Savannah, Georgia? Spiritually and historically, I suppose.
Well, I don't think it's only Savannah. I think it's Savannah now.
Okay.
Excuse me. I think it's Savannah now because of the age of that particular congregation. I remember having gone to Defusky Island, and the first African Baptist church on the island of Defusky was the first African Baptist church in the state of South Carolina. And I remember having met not only the pastor but the descendants of the people who established that church, and the history that I gathered from speaking to him, Pastor Green, and the story that I wrote for the United Church of Christ and for the Baptist Informer, which was a newspaper for the State Baptist Convention, that actually brought attorneys out of New York for the purpose of grandfathering the people in who stayed on that island, so they would not have to have their land stolen from them by exorbitant taxes. And I spoke with a guy in Savannah, in Pinpoint Community, who is also they are descendants of the Geechee community, and that community is still pretty much intact. And he said to me, in our discussion about the Fusky, he said to me, "Did you know that there are only about 15 Africans still on that island? The rest of them have been pushed off the island." I didn't know that, but when I and Gene, my roommate, went to the Fusky to gather the story and do the photographs, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of Africans on that island, and that was at the time that International Paper Company was taking the land from the people who lived there in order to establish that development on the Fusky. And we're talking about quite a few years ago, and there were $300,000 a lot then. So you can imagine what it is now, because they took the land because the billionaires no longer wanted to be a part of Hilton Head. And that island, if you were not a billionaire, you could not afford to live on that island. It was just that simple. and that to this day is continuing, from what I understand. So it's just, and I say all that to say it has been and is South Carolina. I think what happened, Ron, is that it switches between the two, and eventually it will be Florida, because most people don't know that the Underground Railroad started long before Harriet Tubman, and it did not go north. It went south. It went into Florida, because Florida was not a state. It was a territory. And the Native Americans would protect those who were escaping slavery, and they established communities, and they established all African towns in Florida. And once you got there, you were protected, because any slave catchers who went into Florida didn't come back. And there were those who had escaped, along with the Native Americans, who made sure that they did not return. And anyone who escaped to Florida would never be captured and brought back into slavery. So I just think it's this whole coastline, if you when you really think about it. It's just bits and pieces that we're learning now. And let me tell you this part also. This is how the enslaved people thought when they made quilts. They made quilts because they saw all of us as Africans being quilts. All enslaved people were a piece of the quilt. And if you know what about making quilts, it's just pieces of material that's arbitrarily chosen that ends up being a quilt. And once it's done, no one talks about the arbitrarily chosen pieces of cloth. No one talks about the individual pieces of material. They don't even see the material anymore. What they actually see is a quilt. And that quilt is made up of different types of fabric, different colors of fabric, different designs of fabric, but all of it makes up the quilt. And that's the African, especially the enslaved African, regardless of whether you worked in the house or the swamps, regardless of whether you were born as a result of a rape from the master and you were light and bright and damn near white, or whether you were charcoal black, you're part of the quilt. That's how enslaved people saw us, and that's how we saw ourselves until we got greedy during the period of assimilation, which we called integration. I'm done.
You reminded me, I was just a little boy, and I remember my grandmother, they had feed sacks full of rags. They didn't throw those rags away. And I remember, especially in the wintertime, when it started to get cold, I'm sitting close to the heater, that pot-belly stove, and sitting in a circle or square or something, and everybody had a corner. And they sit there and talk. Just sit there and talk, or sit there and sing and make that quilt. It was a beautiful thing to see. It's a lost art, The making of it was to me just as beautiful as the quilt itself. I hadn't seen that in a long time.
But Ron, just as important as making it is this. All of you on this phone, I want you to think about this. If you've ever seen anyone make a quilt, I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about growing up making a quilt. Now, one time have I ever seen anyone making a quilt. My aunts, my grandmama, my mom, I've never seen any of them measure a bed. But when they finished that quilt, whether it was a single bed or a double bed, it fit. I've never seen them measure it, but it fit. I remember when we were in Africa, and I don't know whether Kathy's on or not, but I remember when we were in Africa, we went to Mbatini village, and we went into this cloth shop, and Kathy and Miss Smith were talking to this lady about making a garment. And this woman looked at Kathy and told her to come back tomorrow and it would be ready. She did not measure her. She looked at her. When she went back, it fit. Are you on, Kathy? Guess not. But anyway,
I am. Yes, I'm on.
you remember that?
Yes, I do. And there were no patterns used or anything like that. They just made it. And I'm cleaning out some of my stuff, preparing to move. And I just came across the fabric, a piece of that fabric about an hour ago. And it is just as vibrant and beautiful now as it was then. I mean, and I don't even know how they printed any of this stuff because everything was lying on a piece of something on dirt, and you're buying it from the market like that, and that's how they make things. And so I don't even know how the fabric is printed, but it's sturdy, it's durable, and they don't use patterns and they don't measure you. You're correct.
Thank you. I'm done, Ron.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Questions or comments?
Well, let me add this. The Geechee community that I went to, Pinpoint Community in Georgia, that's the community that Clarence Thomas was born in. Yeah.
He got away from.
I asked the guy about him because I saw him when they did the presentation, right? And I asked the guy, I said, so Clarence Thomas was reared here? He said, no, he was born here, and he left when he was 7 years old and moved into Savannah to live with his grandparents. But he did go back, back and forth there. And he's included in the video presentation that they do about it, and he's related to and very familiar with, all the people in that community. Even though I don't know whether he would allow himself to be connected to that now because who his boss lady is now, so she might not permit that. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you. Very enlightening and very spiritual as well. This seems like a good place to pause again, guys. Do we have any questions or comments? I think tonight has been very.
Good evening, Ron. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How you doing, George?
I'm doing well. I just want to also, say that it's been very spiritual, enlightening to hear Pastor and everyone talk about the importance of our creative gifts that the Creator has blessed us with. And I just want to speak just briefly in reference to an African term that talks about medu netter, which is basically what we see, as being the symbols that our ancestors were able to create on the tombs. And when I say the tombs, we were talking about, the stones of the building in reference to what Pastor was talking about the church. But if we look at it, even in terms of how we were able to appreciate symbols. And I think it was Richard Pryor who was in a movie, that there was anthropologists whom he was with, that they went into the tombs, but they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures. And I was just reminiscing in reference to how we can appreciate what was evidence, factual evidence, in terms of that being something that our ancestors were so creative to put it on, stone, but how it's still relevant today when we talk about our creative intelligences, when we talk about our spiritual way of just being able to see history having its purpose. So I would just kind of relate that back to what Pastor, was talking about in terms of the quote, but even looking at it in terms of what is written or carved on stone. So I just want to share those thoughts because, again, I think it's just something, again, that we can appreciate, our ancestors and what they were able to leave a legacy for us. I'm done. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that, and you just listen to what you said and what Pastor said. It is those symbols that really make us all one. Just kind of closes the boundaries of time and make it all one. Just because I could feel that. I could feel the pain of that man getting beaten for preaching a word, something out of the scriptures. I mean, it's just a powerful words. So thank you.
We are still living the remnants of slavery more than we know it. If you were to go to the museums, and if you were to lay your hands on a Bible that the preachers used, the African preachers used, with the permission from slave owners, the Bible that they used to get messages from to preach, what you will find is that the reason they were able to preach freely is because there were pages torn out of that Bible. They were cut out in such a way you could not tell where they were taken from. They took stories out of the Bible. And I remember the guys talking about Reverend Campbell, who had been to a school in Atlanta, and he was a free man, and he was a preacher. And when he came there to Savannah, he came to that church, and he interacted with one of the pastors, the Reverend Brown, and he showed Reverend Brown his Bible, and he shared with Reverend Brown that you don't know what the Bible actually says because you've only been given a part of it. And when that man showed him the entirety of the scriptures, his messages began to change. And that was the beating that he took was as a result of having read what was in the entire Bible, seeing the stories that had been removed so that the enslaved people would not see them. And if you were to listen, read those same Bibles and listen at the preachers today in the African church who preaches, you will find that they are using the same scriptures, the same passages, and you will also find that the reason the dominant messages that are preached about the letters of Paul is because those are the only portions of Scripture that was left intact for the enslaved preacher to deliver messages from, simply because Paul was in favor of enslavement. Paul felt like it was okay for people to be enslaved more emphatically. It was okay for people of color to be enslaved. Keep in mind that Paul his daddy was a Roman soldier, and his mama, a Hebrew woman, which means that Paul had the opportunity to be white or African. And when it was convenient, he was a Hebrew. And if you read writing, he said, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews. Yet, when you read other of his writings, he says things like, to Onesimus, return to your master. Be obedient to your master. In other words, for escaping, he should apologize to his master and seek the favor of the master and do his biddings. All of these things are nothing new. They are simply things that have been in effect since the Caucasian came in contact with the African. And the only thing that gave this domination is a gun. The African did not have it in it to be as brutal, barbaric as the European. And that is the only thing that allowed the European to dominate, because there was absolutely nothing out of the realm of brutality that the European would not do in order to dominate and control people of color. The castrations, the mutilations, hanging females up and cutting the babies from their stomach, flaying men, are castrating and cutting off the penis of men in the presence of the village. Those kinds of things, that was not us. That kind of brutal domination was for a purpose, not for us to be hating anyone, not for us to be trying to get retribution, but to show us the depth of evilness, the depth of unrightness that we had to work with, to bring them to a place of rightness. In other words, the African is in this earth to create in their own image, to bring barbarians to a place of civilization. Those are the things that we must keep in mind. This is not about hatred. It is about creating in the image and likeness of Elohim. Done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's little after 7. Again, a good place to pause. A lot has been said this evening. Thank everyone for the questions and their comments. And thank Pastor for sharing his tour with us. And, look forward to, you guys have a great week. Look forward to Saturday. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you for sharing. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.